The gavel slammed, a thunderclap that silenced the courtroom, but it couldn't drown out the pounding in Malik's chest. At 17, he stood alone, a black teenager in a borrowed suit, his eyes locked on the floor as whispers hissed like snakes around him. The judge's voice, sharp as a blade, cut through the air. "You think you can waste this court's time with your silence? Malik Jackson wasn't supposed to be here. A straight-A student from a crumbling neighborhood in Atlanta, he'd been dragged into this courtroom on a flimsy shoplifting charge, a charge that reeked of profiling from the moment the store clerk pointed him out. The accusation was absurd, a candy bar allegedly stolen from a gas station he'd only stopped at to buy water. But to the clerk, the cop, and now Judge Harlan Voss, Malik was just another, troubled kid, who fit the description. The courtroom was a pressure cooker. Spectators packed the pew, some local reporters hungry for a story, others neighbors who knew Malik's family, their faces tight with worry. The prosecutor, a wiry man with a slick tie, paced like a predator, tossing out words like delinquent and pattern of behavior, despite zero evidence of either. Malik's public defender, overworked and underprepared, fumbled through papers, barely meeting his client's eyes. And then there was Judge Voss, a man whose reputation for tough justice preceded him, his gray eyes boring into Malik like he was already guilty. "Young man," Voss barked, leaning forward, "this court doesn't tolerate games. Speak up, or I'll assume you're hiding something." The room held its breath. Malik's hands clenched at his sides, but he didn't speak. Not out of defiance, but because words had failed him too many times before. Growing up in a neighborhood where police lights flashed like clockwork, he'd learned that silence was safer than explanations no one believed. The prosecutor seized the moment. "Your Honor, the defendant's refusal to engage only confirms his guilt. We're dealing with a repeat offender in the making." The words stung like a slap. Malik's mother, sitting in the second row, gripped her purse so tightly her knuckles paled. She wanted to scream that her son was no thief, that he was the kid who tutored his little sister every night, who mowed the neighbor's lawn for free when their mower broke. But she stayed silent, too, her faith in the system fraying with every second. Malik's silence wasn't just fear, it was strategy. He'd seen what happened when kids like him talked back, assumptions hardened, sentences lengthened. But today, that silence was a fuse, and the courtroom was about to ignite. "Your Honor," the prosecutor continued, his voice dripping with disdain, "this is a clear case of disrespect for authority. The defendant was caught red-handed, and his refusal to cooperate only proves his character." The crowd murmured, a mix of agreement and unease. A reporter scribbled furiously, sensing a headline. Malik's defender finally stood, clearing his throat. "Your Honor, there's no physical evidence. The security footage is inconclusive, and the clerk's testimony is inconsistent." Voss waved a hand dismissively. "I've heard enough excuses. Mr. Jackson, this is your last chance to explain yourself before I make my ruling." The judge's tone was final, his patience gone. Malik's heart raced. He could feel every eye in the room on him, judging, assuming, boxing him into a stereotype he'd fought his whole life to escape. But Malik wasn't just a quiet kid. He was a planner, a thinker, someone who'd spent years observing the world's unfairness and finding ways to navigate it. In his pocket, tucked inside a folded notebook, was something he prepared for a moment like this, not out of hope, but survival. He took a deep breath, his first words trembling but clear. "Your Honor, I didn't steal anything. I have proof." The room froze. Even Voss, mid-sip from his water glass, paused. Malik reached into his pocket, pulling out the notebook. His hands shook as he opened it, revealing a small, grainy photo taped to the first page, a time-stamped receipt from the gas station, showing he'd paid for the water 10 minutes before the alleged theft. The crowd leaned forward, straining to see. "That's not all," Malik said, his voice growing steadier. "I've got something else you need to hear." He flipped to another page, where he'd written a timeline of that day, meticulous and detailed, backed by texts he'd sent his sister about stopping at the store. The prosecutor scoffed, but Malik kept going, his voice now a quiet fire. "I've been in this situation before. Not in court, but on the street. Cops stopping me for looking suspicious. Clerks following me in stores. I keep records now, because no one believes a kid like me unless I prove it." The judge's face tightened, a flicker of doubt crossing his features. "Approach the bench," he ordered. Malik stepped forward, handing over the notebook. Voss scanned it, his expression unreadable. The prosecutor jumped in, voice sharp. "This is a stunt, Your Honor. He could have fabricated this after the fact." But Malik wasn't done. "There's a video, too," he said, pointing to his phone, which his defender had submitted as evidence but hadn't bothered to check. "I recorded myself at the register, because I knew this could happen. It's time-stamped, same as the receipt." The courtroom buzzed. Voss called for order, his gavel cracking again. "Play it," he said, his voice quieter now, almost cautious. The defender scrambled to set up the phone, projecting the video onto a small screen. There it was, Malik at the counter, paying for a water bottle, the clerk barely looking at him. The time matched perfectly. The crowd gasped, some whispering apologies, others glaring at the prosecutor. Malik's mother let out a choked sob, her hands covering her mouth. The judge stared at the screen, his jaw tight. For the first time, he looked at Malik not as a defendant, but as a person. "Why didn't you show this sooner?" Voss asked, his tone softer but still edged with authority. Malik met his gaze, unflinching. "Because I shouldn't have to. I didn't do anything wrong, but I knew I'd need to prove it. That's what it's like for me. For us." The "us" hung heavy in the air, a quiet indictment of the system that had brought him here. The prosecutor tried to object, but Voss raised a hand, silencing him. The judge leaned back, rubbing his temples. "This court will take a recess," he said, his voice strained. "I need to review this evidence." As the gavel fell, the room erupted in murmurs. Malik returned to his seat, his mother rushing to hug him, tears streaming down her face. The neighbors in the crowd nodded at him, their eyes filled with pride and pain. But Malik's face stayed calm, his mind racing. He'd won a battle, but the war the one fought every day in stores, on streets, in systems built to doubt him was far from over. During the recess, the courtroom emptied, but the tension lingered like smoke. Malik sat with his mother, who whispered, "I'm so proud of you," over and over, as if saying it enough could shield him from the world. The public defender, now apologetic, promised to push harder when the session resumed. But Malik wasn't focused on that. He was thinking about the other kids, the ones who didn't have a receipt, a video, a notebook. The ones who faced judges like Voss and never got a chance to speak. When the court reconvened, Voss looked different, tired, maybe even shaken. He cleared his throat, addressing the room. "After reviewing the evidence, it's clear the charges against Mr. Jackson lack merit. The case is dismissed." The room exhaled. Malik's mother squeezed his hand, tears falling again. But Voss wasn't finished. He leaned forward, his voice quieter, almost human. "Mr. Jackson, this court owes you an apology. Your preparedness exposed a failure in this system. I won't pretend it's the first, but I hope it's a lesson." Malik nodded, his face unreadable. He wanted to believe the judge's words, but he knew better. Apologies didn't erase the hours he'd spent in a cell, the glares he'd endured, the fear that had lodged in his chest. Still, as he walked out of the courtroom, head high, he felt something shift. Not in the world, but in himself. He'd spoken. He'd been heard. And maybe, just maybe, that was a start. Malik stepped out of the courthouse into the humid Atlanta afternoon, the weight of the trial still clinging to him like damp air. The crowd outside was larger than he'd expected, neighbors, classmates, even strangers who'd heard about the case through whispers on X. Some held signs, "Justice for Malik, end profiling now." Others just stood, watching, their faces a mix of relief and anger. Malik's mother, Tanya, kept her arm around him, her grip both protective and proud. "You did it, baby," she whispered, but Malik's eyes were on the horizon, where the city skyline loomed, indifferent to his victory. The news spread fast. By evening, local stations were running segments on the black teen who outsmarted the system. Reporters called Malik's phone, but he let them go to voicemail. He wasn't ready to be their story. Instead, he sat at his kitchen table, his notebook open, scribbling thoughts. The receipt, the video, the timeline, they weren't just evidence. They were armor, built from years of knowing he'd need to prove his innocence in a world quick to assume his guilt. But armor wasn't enough. He wanted change. The next morning, Malik woke to a flood of messages. Classmates shared his story on X, their posts raw and unfiltered. "This happened to my cousin too, cops need to do better, Malik's a hero." A local activist group, Justice Now, reached out, inviting him to speak at a community forum. Tanya was hesitant. "You're 17, Malik. You don't have to carry this." But Malik shook his head. "If I don't, who will?" The forum was held in a packed community center, its walls lined with posters from past protests. Malik stood at the podium, his borrowed suit replaced by a hoodie and jeans, his notebook clutched like a lifeline. The crowd was diverse: black, white, Latino, young, old, some skeptical, others already on his side. He took a breath, his voice steady but heavy with emotion. "I didn't want to be here," he began. "I didn't want to be in that courtroom, proving I'm not a thief. But I had to. Because that's what it's like for usualways, proving we're not what they think." The room was silent, hanging on his words. He told his story, not just the trial but the years leading up to it, the times he'd been followed in stores, the police stops for routine checks, the teachers who assumed he'd fail before he even tried. He spoke of his sister, Aisha, who at 12 was already learning to keep her head down. "This isn't just about me," he said. "It's about her. It's about all of us." A woman in the front row, her hair gray and eyes fierce, stood up. "What do we do, Malik? How do we stop this?" The question hit him like a wave. He wasn't a leader, not yet, but he felt the weight of their hope. "We start by talking," he said. "Not just to each other, but to them, the ones who make the rules, who hold the gavels. They need to hear us." The forum sparked something. Malik's story, amplified by X, drew attention from local leaders. A city council member, Elena Ruiz, reached out, proposing a meeting with community organizers to address profiling in stores and police practices. Malik agreed, but he wasn't naive. He'd seen promises fade before. Still, he showed up, notebook in hand, ready to hold them accountable. The meeting was tense. Store owners, police reps, and community members sat around a long table, their voices clashing. A gas station manager, not the one from Malik's case, defended his staff. "We're just protecting our businesses," he said, arms crossed. Malik's jaw tightened, but he stayed calm. "Protecting from what?" he asked. "Kids buying water." The room stilled. Elena nodded, scribbling notes. The police rep, a gruff man named Officer Daniels, admitted, "We're trained to spot threats. Sometimes, we get it wrong." It wasn't an apology, but it was a crack in the wall. Malik didn't stop there. He and Justice Now launched a campaign called Proof of Us, encouraging young people to document their encounters with police or store clerks, videos, receipts, timestamps, anything to build a case. The campaign spread, with teens across Atlanta sharing their stories on X, each post a small act of defiance. Malik's phone buzzed constantly, but he read every message, every story. They weren't just data points, they were lives, each one a mirror of his own. School became harder. Some classmates hailed him as a hero, others whispered he was making trouble. A teacher pulled him aside, warning him to stay focused on studies, not protests. Malik bit back a response. He was still the kid who aced calculus, but now he was something more. A voice. Aisha noticed the change. "You're different," she said one night, watching him type a speech. "Braver." Malik smiled, ruffling her hair. "Gotta be, for you." Months passed, and the campaign gained traction. Elena pushed for a city ordinance requiring stores to train staff on bias, with penalties for false accusations. The police department, under pressure, agreed to review their profiling protocols. Malik spoke at more events, his voice growing stronger, his notebook now a symbol of resilience. But not everyone was on board. Some ex-posts called him a troublemaker, or worse, accusing him of exploiting his story. One night, he found graffiti on his family's mailbox, "Know your place." Tanya wanted to move, but Malik refused. "This is our home," he said. "They don't get to scare us out." The backlash stung, but it fueled him. He organized a march, not just for himself but for every kid who'd been profiled, arrested, or worse. Hundreds joined teens, parents, even a few store clerks who'd seen the truth in their own workplaces. They marched through downtown Atlanta, signs high, voices loud. Malik led, his heart pounding not with fear but purpose. At the steps of City Hall, he spoke, his words carrying over the crowd. "We're not asking for special treatment. We're asking for fairness. For a chance to be seen as people, not problems." The march made national news. Judge Voss, now retired, saw it on TV. He hadn't spoken to Malik since the trial, but the boy's face haunted him. Voss had prided himself on being fair, but Malik's case exposed his blind spots. He wrote a letter, published in the local paper, admitting his mistake. "I judged too quickly," he wrote. "Malik Jackson showed me justice isn't just a gavlet's listening." The letter went viral, shared thousands of times on X, a rare moment of accountability. Malik read it, unsure how to feel. The apology didn't erase the humiliation, but it was a step. He kept pushing, meeting with lawmakers, speaking at schools, turning his pain into progress. By his senior year, the city passed the ordinance, and the police implemented new training. It wasn't perfect change, never is, but it was proof that one voice, one notebook, could shift the tide. On graduation day, Malik walked across the stage, his cap decorated with the words, "Proof of Us." The crowd cheered, Tanya and Aisha loudest of all. He'd been accepted to Morehouse College, with a scholarship for social justice studies. As he held his diploma, he thought of the courtroom, the gavel, the silence he'd broken. He wasn't just Malik anymore, was a spark, a story, a movement. The journey wasn't over. Prejudice lingered, in subtle glances and overt threats. But Malik knew his power now. He'd faced a system built to doubt him and come out stronger. As he looked out at the crowd, he saw Aisha's grin, Tanya's tears, and the faces of strangers who believed in him. Justice wasn't a destination, it was a fight, and he was ready for it. What's right, what's wrong, what's just? Share your thoughts. Show Do we heal a community divided by distrust?